Donald Harvey was born on April 15, 1952, in Hamilton, Ohio, as the eldest of 3 children. With his curly hair and large brown eyes, he was affectionately known as Donnie by his parents, Ray and Goldie Harvey. Soon after his birth, the family relocated to Boonville, Kentucky, a small community nestled on the eastern slopes of the Appalachian Mountains. There, Ray worked as a tobacco farmer while Goldie cared for the home and children. Though the family faced deep poverty and Ray and Goldie's marriage grew increasingly strained, they remained loving and attentive parents. Donald was described as a quiet, reserved child who showed no outward signs of disturbance. Yet, the roots of his later sadistic tendencies may have been planted early. Reports suggest that between the ages of 4 and 20, Donald suffered physical abuse at the hands of at least 3 different men. One of Donald's abusers was reportedly his maternal uncle. Another was an older neighbor who offered him money when he was 18. Donald also claimed that he was assaulted by his former roommate, Randy White. While such a traumatic past cannot excuse his later atrocities, it remains a point of interest for psychologists and criminal profilers seeking to understand his psyche. In school, Donald was known to be withdrawn and socially isolated. He rarely took part in extracurricular activities, preferring instead to spend his time reading. His academic diligence earned him good grades and the label of teacher's pet, which made him a target of teasing from his peers. After completing his studies at Sturgeon Elementary School, Donald enrolled at Boonville High School in 1968. Despite his good scores, he rapidly became bored with the daily routine, which prompted him to drop out. He later received a diploma from a correspondence school out of Chicago and got his GED the following year at the age of 16. Having no future aspirations, Donald didn't know what he would do with his life at this point. He eventually relocated to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he managed to secure a job at a local factory. Donald was doing well in this job until the work dried up at the plant in 1970, and he was eventually laid off. A few days later, his mother called him and asked him to travel to Kentucky and visit his ailing grandfather, who was recently placed in Marymount Hospital in London, Kentucky. He had no idea that agreeing to his mother's request would forever change the course of his life. While visiting his ill grandfather every day, Donald formed a trusting bond with the hospital workers. In fact, they liked him so much that he was offered a job at the hospital. It was here that a terrifying journey of madness and mayhem began, which would go on to last nearly 20 years. Donald's true motive for wanting to work as a nurse's aide might not ever be known. However, some people believe that he was desperate to earn money after losing his previous job. He was not a trained nurse or doctor, but the hospital staff had full faith in him. Donald's duties required him to spend hours alone with patients, including changing bedpans, inserting catheters, and passing out medications. While looking after the patients was by no means an easy job, Donald's first few weeks at the hospital were uneventful. That is, until one incident with an elderly patient snapped something within him, a disturbing beginning to an unfathomable string of events. It was May 31st, 1970, and Donald was taking care of an 88-year-old stroke victim, Logan Evans. During an evening shift, he walked into a private room to check on the elderly patient, and Mr. Evans rubbed feces in Donald's face. Although the patient was most likely not in his right mind following his stroke, the incident angered Donald so much that he lost all control. The next thing he knew, he was smothering the elderly man with a blue plastic bag and a pillow. Once Evans was motionless, Donald listened to his heart rate with a stethoscope to make sure that he was dead. He then disposed of the plastic bag and cleaned him up, dressing him in a clean hospital gown and showering before notifying the nurses. After this incident, no eyebrows were raised and no questions were asked. I went to fill back the sheet. He covered me in stool with his hand and was smelling to death. I had to do that, with a pillow, like a predator who just got his first taste of blood. Donald's thirst for killing only grew. The very next day, he was looking after another elderly patient, 69-year-old James Tyree. Donald, it seems, used the wrong size catheter on him. Tyree initially let him proceed, but then yelled at him to take it out. Donald used the heel of his hand to control him until he vomited blood and died due to an air embolism. Again, no suspicions were raised. As no one detected foul play in his first 2 murders, Donald became more carefree. Just 3 weeks after committing his first murder, he cut off the oxygen tank of a 42-year-old patient, Elizabeth Wyatt. This was the beginning of his mercy kills, as he would call his killings later. He claimed he was aware that she was praying to die, and even told him she wished she could die. So he killed her to end her suffering. For hours later, a nurse found her dead. Again, no one questioned Donald. Since no one at the hospital became suspicious, Donald saw this as an opportunity to unleash his inner monster. Over the next 10 months, 15 patients died under his care while working at the hospital. Be it pleasure or experimentation, the methods of each murder varied. Smothering, sabotaging oxygen tanks, injecting lethal drugs, overdosing people with medication. It seems he would use almost anything to kill. When angered, his methods became more brutal. On one occasion, after an argument with a patient, Donald snuck into the patient's room and inserted a coat hanger through his catheter, puncturing his bladder and bowel. As a result of the puncture, infection set in, and the man died a few days later. Despite this brutality, Donald always considered these killings to be merciful. The self-proclaimed angel of death wanted to play God with the lives of the vulnerable, cloaking his monstrosities in a warm blanket by giving them the title Mercy Killings. March 31st, 1971, exactly 1 year after his first murder, was the last day Donald worked at Marymount Hospital. That evening, he was arrested for a burglary he committed while drunk. In his drunken stupor, Donald incoherently confessed about the murders to the cops, but no one took him seriously. Donald ultimately faced charges of petty theft. Instead of serving prison time, he paid a hefty fine. Although Donald managed to remain free, this incident changed the course of his life for a brief time. For the next few months, Donald tried to get his life back in order and eventually found work as a part-time nurse's aide at Cardinal Hill Hospital in Lexington. In June of 1973, he started a second nursing job at Lexington's Good Samaritan Hospital. He worked both jobs simultaneously until deciding to move on to other positions. Between August 1974 and September 1975, he worked first as a telephone operator in Lexington and then as a clerk at St. Luke's Hospital in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. For some reason, Donald was able to control his urge to kill during this time. It's possible that he simply did not have the same access to the patients as he did at his previous workplace, which could also explain why he shifted from job to job during this time. Despite his efforts to keep his killing urges in check, his inner demons slowly became increasingly more difficult to manage, finally driving him across the state line into Cincinnati, Ohio. In September 1975, Donald moved back to Cincinnati, and within weeks he started working the night shift at the Cincinnati VA Medical Hospital. He worked there as a nursing assistant, housekeeping aide, cardiac catheterization technician, and autopsy assistant. As he became more comfortable in a hospital setting once again, he started right where he had left off. Since he worked at night, he had very little supervision and unlimited access to all the areas of the hospital. Over the course of the following 10 years, Donald would end up murdering at least 15 patients while working at the hospital. To relish all his crimes, he even kept a detailed diary of his murders and took notes on each victim. These grisly details included sprinkling rat poison in a patient's dessert, pressing a plastic bag and wet towel over the mouth and nose, injecting cyanide into an intravenous tube, adding arsenic and cyanide to orange juice, injecting cyanide into a patient's buttocks, and many more. Yet the depravity of his crimes did not end there. Throughout his murder spree, Donald was experimenting with different methods based on medical journals he was studying for hints as to how to better conceal his crimes. Cyanide soon became his favorite tool for murder. He'd mix it into the victim's food or pour it directly into their gastric tube. Over the years, he amassed an astounding 30 pounds of cyanide, which he had slowly pilfered from the hospital. He would keep his deadly supply at home for safekeeping. I started using morphine because it wasn't controlled that much in Kentucky, especially in small hospitals in the 1970s. And I employed a couple of metal liners. I used cyanide, used arsenic, I used adhesive planer, a plastic bag tip. Despite all the deaths, Donald Harvey always managed to stay under everyone's radar. He had carefully set up all of his killings to look like accidents or natural causes. Donald even earned himself the nickname the Angel of Death and the Kiss of Death amongst his co-workers. They all thought it was a coincidence that he was always around when these deaths occurred. Little did they suspect that their charming co-worker was a silent predator. Although years down the line, Donald insisted that his crimes were merely an act of mercy motivated by compassion. There were other crimes that speak otherwise. The beginning of the 1980s brought out variations in both Donald's life and his crimes. Without a doubt, these crimes were purely driven by rage and revenge. In the early 1980s, Donald briefly began dating a man named Doug Hill. The relationship was challenging from the start, as they argued on a regular basis. After one of those heated fights, Donald retaliated by slipping arsenic into Doug's ice cream. Although he survived, the incident signified the first instance where Donald tried to harm someone outside of the hospital. This was a chilling sign that the monster had begun to stretch his boundaries. Following another fallout with Doug, Donald moved in with another lover, Carl Howell, within a short period of time. The relationship was going well in the beginning before Donald suspected Howell of cheating on him. Out of jealousy, he would add small doses of arsenic into Howell's food so that he would be too ill to leave their apartment. At this point, Donald's acts of revenge were no longer limited to his home or workplace. On one occasion, following an argument, he laced one of the beverages of his female neighbor with hepatitis serum, which nearly killed her before the infection was diagnosed and treated. While luck was on her side, it wouldn't be the same for another of Donald's neighbors, Helen Metzger. The arsenic he put in one of her pies caused her death at a local hospital a week later. Donald's confidence was soaring high after getting away with so many murders. He must have felt invincible. In April 1983, after a tiff with Howell's parents, Donald regularly began to poison their food with arsenic in small doses. On May 1, 1983, Howell's father, Henry, suffered a stroke and was admitted to Providence Hospital. To complete his unfinished business, Donald placed arsenic in his pudding before leaving during a hospital visit. Sadly, the elderly man died later that night. Donald continued to poison Carl's mother, Margaret, off and on for the next year, but was unsuccessful in his attempts to kill her. In January 1984, Howell broke up with Donald and asked him to move out. Needless to say, Donald was not happy about it. Unable to accept the rejection, he spent the next 2 years trying to kill his former partner with his poisonous concoctions. As a means of revenge, Donald even went to great lengths in an unsuccessful murder attempt against one of Howell's female friends. Though he managed to land Howell in the hospital at one point, his attempts to eliminate him from the face of the earth had failed. The first cloud of suspicion that loomed over Donald's head was on July 18, 1985, when security guards noticed Donald acting suspiciously and decided to search his gym bag. Inside the haversack, the guards discovered a .38 caliber pistol, hypodermic needles, surgical scissors, gloves, a cocaine spoon, various medical texts, 2 occult books, and a biography of serial killer Charles Sobridge. Fined $50 for carrying a firearm on federal property, Donald was then given the option to quietly resign from his job rather than be fired. Call it a stroke of luck or pure negligence from the law enforcement side. None of this ever appeared in his work record, and the hospital authorities did not open an investigation to determine if the man was responsible for any other crimes while working at the hospital. It took Donald 7 months to secure another job at a local hospital. In February of 1986, he started working as a part-time nurse's aide at Drake Memorial Hospital in Cincinnati. Unaware of his past and impressed by his performance, his new employers soon offered him a full-time position at the hospital. Before long, Donald settled back into his old routine. Over the next 13 months, Harvey murdered another 26 patients and attempted to kill several more by disconnecting life support machines, injecting air into veins, causing suffocation, and injecting arsenic, cyanide, and petroleum-based cleaners. The 2-decade-long murder spree came to an end with one last murder. On March 7, 1987, a 44-year-old patient, John Powell, mysteriously died. Powell was on life support from a bad motorcycle accident for several months before his demise, but had since started to recover. Due to Ohio's law of a mandatory autopsy for vehicular homicide, This death landed Donald in a situation that he had never faced before. During the autopsy, an assistant coroner noticed the faint scent of almonds, which is a telltale sign of cyanide. Authorities got involved immediately following this concerning discovery. Initially, suspicion fell upon the people closer to Powell, but investigators failed to come up with any evidence or motive pointing toward any of Powell's friends or family members. So it did not take them long to focus on hospital employees who had access to Powell's room. Donald Harvey was one of those names on the short list. To rule out their names, hospital employees at this point were volunteering to take polygraph tests. Donald also volunteered to take a test and even bought a book on how to beat lie detector tests. But eventually, he did not go through with the test and called in sick on the day of his scheduled appointment. If this was not concerning enough, investigators learned about his questionable departure from the VA hospital, as well as his notorious hospital nickname, Angel of Death. Given the numerous unusual deaths that seemed to surround him, authorities began to focus their entire investigation on Donald. He was brought in for questioning. In the initial interrogation phase, Donald denied having anything to do with Powell's murder and portrayed himself as a victim of coincidence. It was only after hours of questioning and playing a bit of good cop, bad cop that he finally confessed to having put cyanide in John Powell's G-tube. He tried to explain that it was because he felt sorry for him and his family. He still denied responsibility for any of the other suspicious deaths. Donald was taken into custody while investigators began to look for other evidence. On August 11, 1987, Donald Harvey, 35 at the time, sat down with investigators and confessed to committing 33 murders over the previous 17 years. The number grew to 78 in total as the days passed. Investigators wanted Donald to be checked for his mental state before his claims were taken to be accurate. As they were doubtful of the numbers Donald provided them, following several psychiatric tests by numerous experts, it was determined that Donald knew the difference between right and wrong and was able to conform to the conduct of the law. Hence, he was sane and competent. In November of 1987, Donald Harvey was sentenced to 8 life terms plus 20 years for the murders at Marymount Hospital. In February 1988, he entered guilty pleas on 3 additional Cincinnati homicides and 3 attempted murders, drawing 3 life sentences plus 3 terms of 7 to 25 years. The investigation into the remaining deaths was closed after 2 years, as investigators determined that there was not enough evidence to implicate him in the murders. Whether people were stunned or disgusted by his actions, they definitely were intrigued to know what went on inside his sick mind. In a 1991 interview, a reporter from the Columbus Dispatch asked Donald Harvey about his motive behind the killings, giving away a rare glimpse inside his mind. Donald said that the reign of terror began with a desire for control. In his eyes, people controlled him for 18 years, and then he controlled his own destiny. He loved the power and to be able to control whether people lived or died. Even in the world of serial killers, Donald Harvey holds a special place, not only because of his overwhelming kill count, but also because of his choice to kill people he personally knew in addition to his patients. According to an article published on July 23, 2001, by the Associated Press listing the worst serial killers in the United States, Donald Harvey held the number 1 place, even surpassing the notorious John Wayne Gacy. While everyone expected Donald Harvey to spend his days behind bars and, unlike his unfortunate victims, die a natural death, destiny had something else in store for him. On March 28, 2017, 64-year-old Donald Harvey was found badly beaten inside his cell in protective custody at the Toledo Correctional Institution in Lucas County. He would die 2 days later at the age of 64 from blunt head trauma due to skull fracture and brain damage. Months after the death, an inmate named James D. Elliott, serving 37 years for numerous burglary offenses, would later write the Toledo Blade and confess to the murder. In those letters, Elliott confessed to punching and stomping on Donald in his cell. He said he grew up in Kentucky near some relatives of Donald's victims and claimed that he committed the crime to give them some closure and peace of mind. Hopefully, everyone from our area will take some solace in the fact that one of their own gave Harvey the punishment that he should have gotten from the courts. Elliott was quoted as writing, "In September 2019, Elliott was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to the murder of the infamous Angel of Death. To his last day, Donald Harvey insisted that the majority of his killings were out of mercy. But the truth is, in the process of becoming a murderer from a nurse, Donald appointed himself the judge, jury, and executioner over people's lives. Perhaps because he was not caught for decades, he assumed it was his right to control other people's lives. Stephanie Lynn Hebert was born on June 30th, 1972. Her parents, Donald and Joyce Hebert, were longtime residents of a suburban neighborhood in Wagamond County, Louisiana. In May of 1978, 5-year-old sweet and cheerful Stephanie just graduated kindergarten at Live Oak Manor Elementary School. Shortly after that, schools were dismissed for the summer break. So it was the time for play dates, sleepovers, and fun in the sun for the children. And nobody had a clue that it would all change on June 13th, 1978. That morning, Stephanie came back to her house to grab a bite to eat after spending the previous night at her friend's house. After lunch, she was going to play with another friend. After spending some time with her mother at around 2:30 p.m., little Stephanie left her home to go to her friend's house just 3 doors down. It never crossed Joyce's mind that this would be the last time she would see her daughter. Hours would go by before anybody realized that Stephanie never made it to her friend's house. Once they did, Stephanie's frantic parents called the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office to report that their daughter was missing. Authorities immediately began searching nearby areas for the little girl. About 100 deputies and 50 volunteers went down on foot through the dense woods and swampy areas with helicopters scanning over them. Stephanie's parents, volunteers from the community, conducted their own search. The FBI even joined the local police department to help with the search. But despite their relentless efforts, no traces of Stephanie would be found. The search took on an ominous tone when no traces of Stephanie was found after 72 hours of extensive searching. Although it was initially assumed that Stephanie had lost her way and was stuck somewhere, soon they were considering a possible abduction. 2 witnesses came forward after police started interviewing people in the community. An ice cream truck driver claimed that Stephanie came by to buy some cotton candy from her. She was accompanied by an unknown woman wore heavy makeup and bright-colored shoes. The duo then walked toward a 1974 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am and drove away. An 8-year-old boy from the neighborhood also saw Stephanie with a woman of a similar description around 5:30 p.m., about 4 blocks from the Hebert home. Sadly, every effort to locate Stephanie was fruitless, as no car or woman of that description were ever found. After 5 months, just before Thanksgiving, a hunter found partial skeletal remains in a rural wooded area of St. Charles Parish, Louisiana, just about 20 miles away from Stephanie's home. A rope was wrapped around the little skeleton. It was evident that she was bound to a willow tree and left there, exposed to the harsh elements before her death. Stephanie's distinctive blue-rimmed glasses, shoes, and clothes were found nearby. Although the crime scene did not present many clues about the perpetrator, DNA was collected from the scene. The remains were identified as poor Stephanie Hebert after the autopsy was all done. Her parents were devastated at the gruesome discovery, as they always hoped that their daughter would be found alive. Detectives had only circumstantial evidence at the time, but they grew suspicious of a teenage neighbor, Roger Alexander. Stephanie was friends with Roger's sister and spent the previous night before her disappearance at their house to attend a sleepover. Detectives were confident that Roger was the killer and presented the case to a grand jury. However, Roger had an alibi that he was working with his cousin during Stephanie's disappearance and passed a polygraph test. So the jury declined to prosecute him due to insufficient evidence. But suspicions followed him for decades as the case remained cold. Then years later, suspicion fell on another person, Daniel Parks, who lived near Stephanie's house when he was charged with the rape of a then 7-year-old girl. The victim testified that Parks had once threatened her, saying that she might end up like Hebert. When brought in for questioning, Parks confessed to the rape as well as the comment about Stephanie, but later recanted his confession. He maintained that he had incorrectly implicated himself in the crime due to his condition of diabetes. He was found guilty of 2 counts of aggravated rape and was sentenced to life in prison, but could not be further connected with Stephanie's murder. In 2012, detectives got their big break in the case. 50-year-old Jason Franklin Jr., who went by Jay, came forward with secrets that he held onto for 3 decades. Jay described the sexual and physical abuse he suffered at his own father's hands, as well as his parents' involvement in Stephanie's abduction that ended with her death. Jay stated that Jason Franklin Sr., who was a resident of the area where Stephanie lived, raped the little girl on 3 separate occasions before the day of her murder. He also stated that while his father had been responsible for Stephanie's death, his mother was an accomplice. Joyce Vanette, Jay's mother, would often help Franklin Sr. fulfill his sick desires despite the two of them being divorced. Jay revealed that it was Vanette who abducted Stephanie using 6-year-old Jay as bait to lure the girl in. She then lured Stephanie into their car and drove her to a house in Luling, where Franklin Sr. was already waiting. At some point, he loaded Stephanie into a car and told his former wife to follow him with their 6-year-old son in tow. They drove to the swampy area where Stephanie's body would later be found. Jason took Polaroid photos of Stephanie after stripping her, while Jay was forced to pose with her. On previous occasions, Stephanie had kept her mouth shut about the abuse, but this time she tearfully declared that she would tell her daddy everything. Jason then witnessed his father straddling Stephanie and binding her to a tree as he and his mother pulled away. Jay even led investigators to the exact area where Stephanie had been found. He said that he was so scared of his father that he had been unable to come forward until he was 50 years old. No arrest would follow along until 6 more years had passed after this testimony from Jay. While detectives slowly built their case against Jason, Vanette denied any involvement in Stephanie's murder and called her son a liar. Finally, in 2018, Jason Franklin Sr., 76, was arrested and taken into custody from his home in Massachusetts before being extradited back to Louisiana and charged with Stephanie's murder. He was also accused of raping 2 other children between 3 and 7 years old, along with a bear. The other 2 incidents occurred between 1975 and 1977. Vanette would not be charged with Stephanie's abduction and murder due to a lack of evidence. The arrest brought a sense of peace to Stephanie's parents, Donald and Joyce, after decades of seeking justice for their daughter. They both passed away in 2020. As justice was on the way, the case came to an abrupt stop. In January 2022, Franklin Sr. died of a respiratory illness while in prison. In June 2022, detectives officially closed this 44-year-old cold case after the main witness, Jay, was killed by a drunk driver. Brittany Drexel was born on October 7, 1991 in Rochester, New York. Shortly after Brittany was born, Don married Chad Drexel, a military man who adopted the girl and loved her like his own daughter. After Chad's military service ended, the family lived in the Rochester suburb of Chile. Drexel was born with persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous in her right eye, which caused her vision to be hazy. This condition required several surgeries, and Brittany ended up blind in that eye. To cover the eye's tendency to wander, she wore contact lenses that gave her a distinctive appearance. Brittany was full of life. Despite her eye condition and small stature, she loved to play soccer. In her late teens, she developed a love of cosmetology and wanted to become a model. It was spring break in April 2009. 17-year-old Brittany asked permission from her mother to go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina with her boyfriend and some girlfriends. Her mother refused as there were no accompanying adults on the trip and she did not know the teenagers well. Call it mother's intuition or what you will, but she also had a hunch that something bad would happen on that trip. This led to arguments between the mother and daughter which continued for several days. Finally, on April 22, 2009, her mother agreed when Brittany asked if she could go to a friend's house for a day or 2 to calm down. However, Brittany left for South Carolina with the other students without telling her mother. On April 25, 2009, Brittany and the other teenagers arrived at the Bar Harbor Hotel in Myrtle Beach. Brittany called her mother once during the daytime to tell her she was at the beach, but did not mention which one. Her mother assumed that Brady had been referring to a beach along the Lake Ontario shoreline, close to her friend's house where she was supposed to go. That night around 8 p.m., Drexel left the hotel alone to visit a longtime friend who was staying at the Blue Water Resort. She was captured entering the Blue Water Resort on security cameras. She was wearing a black and white tank top, flip-flops, and shorts, and was carrying a beige purse. Around 8:45 p.m., the cameras captured her leaving. Throughout the day, Brittany was constantly texting back and forth with her boyfriend, John Greco, who had stayed in the Rochester area because of work commitments. Suddenly, around 9:15 p.m., her text stopped. After waiting for some time when Brittany still did not respond, a worried Greco began calling her friends in Myrtle Beach to see if they knew where she was. When nobody had heard from her, Greco had no choice but to call Brittany's mother to tell her the truth. Was shocked to know that her daughter lied to her to go to Myrtle Beach. There was no time to hold a grudge though, as nobody could contact Brittany. When repeated calls and texts to Brittany's phone went unanswered, Dawn called Chad and then the Rochester police, hoping they could establish communications with their counterparts in South Carolina. The following morning, Myrtle Beach police began looking for Brittany. They soon located the security footage from the Blue Water Resort and found the friend whom she had visited there. The last person to see Brittany before she left was Peter Brazowitz, a 20-year-old nightclub promoter whom Brittany had known from the Rochester area and was also vacationing in Myrtle Beach. Apparently, Brittany had met up with him at a local nightclub the night before. Police interviewed him and the friend staying with him, but no person of interest was identified. The cell phone record showed that Brittany's phone pinged 7 miles south of Myrtle Beach, just half an hour after her disappearance. Then, 2 hours after this, her cell phone pinged again. It was a town called McClellanville, 50 miles south of Myrtle Beach. The phone then went dead and the case went cold. No traces of Brittany would be found after extensive searches. In 2016, 7 years after Brittany's disappearance, this case would see a dramatic break. Taquan Brown, a South Carolina inmate serving a 25-year sentence for manslaughter, told investigators that he had witnessed what happened to Brittany. He said that she was sexually assaulted, pistol-whipped, and shot dead by a group of men, led by Timothy Deshaun Taylor in the area where Brittany's cell phone last pinged. Brown also said that they dumped Brittany's body in a nearby swampy area full of alligators. However, Taylor denied all of these allegations. Once again, the case went silent due to insufficient evidence to charge anyone. In all those years, Brittany's family had started to lose hope of ever finding her. But then, in May of 2022, Brittany's case finally made a breakthrough. This came as a confession from a 62-year-old man named Raymond Moody. Raymond, a registered sex offender, turned himself in to the Georgetown County Sheriff's Office based on an obstruction of justice charge. He was a person of interest in Brittany's disappearance in 2012, but it led nowhere. On May 4th, Moody confessed to the crime and provided a location of potential remains. On May 11th, human remains were located, which were buried in the woods off a private gated drive outside of Georgetown. After medical examination, those remains were identified as Brittany Drexel's. It was discovered that she had been strangled and then buried on the morning of April 26, 2009. The most tragic part of all of this is that Raymond was released from prison in 2004 after serving 21 years of a 42-year sentence for abduction and rape. So if he had served his full sentence, Brittany would still be alive today. While Brittany's family is coping with their loss, Raymond Moody has been arrested and charged with Brittany's murder. Scott Russell Johnson was born in Los Angeles on November 27, 1961 to his parents Grant and Barbara Johnson. Being the family's third child, he was always pampered by his older sister Terry and his older brother Steve. In 1970, after moving to Colorado, their parents separated and the siblings stayed with their mother. Thereafter, the father stayed out of most of their lives, but through these hardships, Scott and his siblings made the best out of the situation by banding together. Scott was a bright student and excelled in mathematics, even taking college-level courses while he was just a freshman in high school. Scott was then accepted into the California Institute of Technology. In 1983, he went to Cambridge University in England for a year. In January of 1984, Scott met Michael Noon, Australian students studying for a PhD at Cambridge University, and they started a relationship, but by that summer Scott had to return to the United States cheerfully. He shared about his relationship with Noon with his brother after coming back home by 1985. He earned a full scholarship to undertake a PhD in mathematics at the Australian National University, so he moved to Australia. Perfect opportunity for this gifted young mathematician to finally reunite with his partner after months of being in a long-distance relationship. Scott applied for permanent residency in 1987 based on his relationship with Noon. The following year, Scott received advice from the Department of Immigration that he would be eligible for permanent residency if a genuine and continuing relationship between Scott and Noon persisted, up to March 10, 1989. However, it did not work out, and Scott and Noon separated while continuing to be friends. On the morning of Saturday, December 10, 1988, a man set out spearfishing with his 13-year-old son at Bluefish Point. As they approached the vicinity, the son noticed a lifeless human body at the bottom of a cliff, was lying among rocks about 200 meters north of Bluefish Point. Investigators quickly reached the area after they were notified of the discovery. The deceased male was found naked lying at the base of the cliff. His clothes were found neatly folded at the top of the cliff with his shoes. A heavy metal pin was also left on top of the clothes pile. The body was identified as the 27-year-old mathematician and PhD Scott Johnson. Despite the unusual circumstances, the death had been deemed a suicide in the initial investigation. On the morning of December 14, 1988, a forensic pathologist performed an autopsy on Scott. He concluded that Scott died as a result of multiple injuries that can be caused by either intentional or unintentional falling from the cliff. An amount of 0.005% alcohol was consistent with his blood. The pathologist also stated that in his 30 years of work, he never saw someone committing suicide by jumping from a cliff while naked, a statement that provides a different aspect to this case. Scott's family did not believe in the suicide theory from the beginning. Years of effort and petitions from Scott's family sparked coroner investigations in 2012 and 2015, which both recommended reopening the case. At the third inquest, new witnesses came forward to say the area was a known gay beat-up spot and told of gangs of men, including Australian Army soldiers, converging on the cliffs to commit gay hate assaults and robberies. According to some reports, Scott's death perfectly aligned with the several violent assaults on gay men that occurred in the late 80s in the adjacent areas. Many witnesses came forward with information about the MP3 gang and the Australian Army soldiers involved in gay bashings in northern beaches, North Sydney and Sydney areas. The witnesses were so scared that they used pseudonyms because they feared if their identities were revealed, they would have to face the wrath of the infamous gang members. There was no direct evidence that connected Scott's death to these attacks, yet many still believed he fell prey to another one of those violent attacks. Then in 2017, a coroner ruled that Johnson fell due to actual or threatened violence by unidentified persons who attacked him because they perceived him as homosexual. After that, a renewed police investigation was launched. And in 2018, a reward of $1 million Australian dollars for information that could help solve the crime was announced. That was then doubled to $2 million in 2020 when Scott's brother Steve put his own money on the table, hoping it would finally bring justice to his brother. It was estimated that up to 80 gay men were murdered by different homophobic gangs around Sydney in the late 1980s, with many pushed off cliffs. In the meantime, in 2019, an informant came forward after hearing about the case, which led investigators to 51-year-old Scott Philip White. The informant was White's ex-wife, Helen, who told police that White had often bragged about bashing young gay men and had not denied killing Scott Johnson when she had asked. The family had for years fought for Australian police to investigate this as a gay hate crime. Finally, they had the person who had been hiding in plain sight for decades. A judge decided that there was insufficient evidence to establish it was a gay hate crime and sentenced White to jail for the 1988 killing. He will be eligible for parole in 2030. White, who was 18 at the time of the murder, did not give evidence in court, but had told police he and Scott had met at a bar in December 1988. It was also revealed that the pair had gone to North Head Cliffs in Manly, which was a well-known gay cruising ground. White claimed they got into a fight and Scott fell to his death. But a judge found that he had struck Scott without any provocation, knowing it would most likely cause the mathematician to fall to his death, which it did. Scott White was sentenced to a maximum of 12 years and 7 months in jail for the then 27-year-old's murder. After a long battle, Scott's family can finally sleep peacefully, knowing their brother got justice. October 8th was one of the coldest days in Klamath County, Oregon. Around 5:30 p.m. on that day, the Klamath County Sheriff's Office got a shocking call. A man was cutting firewood in a wooded area near the lake on Dead Indian Highway in Klamath County, where he discovered 2 lifeless bodies. When detectives arrived at the scene, they found the dead bodies of 2 teenagers, 1 male and 1 female, hidden beneath branches and shrubs. Both of the victims had multiple gunshot wounds to the head. The victims were identified as 19-year-old Kirk Wiseman and 17-year-old Cynthia Freyer. People were shocked at the fact that a double homicide, which appeared to be an abduction and murder by a stranger, could occur in Klamath County. It was concluded that they both had been shot multiple times in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. A letter was also found in which Cynthia wrote to her mother about her hopes and dreams, as well as all the activities they did prior to her death. But she never got the chance to send it to her mother. An autopsy indicated that Cynthia had been sexually assaulted. Retracing their steps before the murder, police found that Kirk and Cynthia had no connection to the area. They had been hitchhiking in Washington State and Oregon, and had plans to go to Crater Lake, a spot where Freyer always wanted to visit, when they vanished without a trace in September 1978. As the investigation went on, detectives also discovered that before going missing, the pair had stayed the night at a motel in Roseburg. They were then picked up by a person who claimed to have dropped the mop at Grants Pass restaurant. But unfortunately, despite extensive investigation of that person, nothing ever came of it. No other suspects ever came to light regarding this double homicide. Over the years, several people were questioned, but no one was ever officially charged. The case soon turned cold and stayed that way for nearly 40 years. In 2018, portions of Cynthia's clothing were sent to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab in Bend, where forensic scientists recovered the DNA of an unknown male. The unknown male DNA was then entered into the Cody's database, but didn't hit on a suspect. Investigators then decided to try their luck with a new genetic genealogy technology and sent the DNA sample to the Virginia-based forensic service Parabon Nanolabs. The unknown male DNA was entered into a genealogy website. Soon, in the summer of 2021, a potential match was discovered. The suspect was identified as Ray Whitson Jr. Investigators discovered that Whitson had previously lived with his family in Klamath Falls between 1976 and 1982 and had worked at a lumber mill. He was familiar with the area where the 2 bodies were found. Whitson had a prior criminal record, but his DNA had never been uploaded to the Cody's database. It was time to apprehend the culprit after all of these years. But unfortunately, it turned out that the suspect had died in 1996. Upon contacting his family, his children agreed to provide a DNA sample, and it was later confirmed that the DNA found at the crime scene indeed belonged to their father, Ray Whitson Jr. Although the case was immediately suspended, knowing that the suspect had long passed, detectives still felt it was crucial for him to bring answers to both Freyer and Wiseman's families, and finally give evidence to the victims' families, including the handwritten letters. Susan Arlene Winters was born on March 14, 1966 in Oklahoma. Throughout the years, Susan proved to be gifted in both academics and athletics. After obtaining a graduate degree in political science from Oklahoma University, she went on to study law. Her career flourished from the start. She worked for a year in the Clark County District Attorney's Office, toiled at a Las Vegas law firm, and sometimes filled in as a judge in North Las Vegas Justice Court. While Susan succeeded in her career, she also wanted to start a family. She married Brent Dennis, a psychologist, in August of 1995. Their first daughter, Avis L., was born 4 years later in October 1999. The family welcomed a second daughter, Anna Danielle, in April 2002. Susan was passionate about every aspect of life. She was an avid reader, a marathon runner, an animal lover, and a devoted mother and wife. Despite being a hardworking attorney, she dedicated all of her free time to her family. This would all change on January 3rd, 2015 at 6:48 a.m. That day, Dennis called 911 after finding his 48-year-old wife, Susan Winters, unresponsive in bed. Paramedics quickly arrived to find Susan barely holding on to life. She was taken to the hospital, and unfortunately at 2:26 p.m., Susan passed away after dentists instructed doctors to take his wife off of life support. According to the coroner's report, Susan died of a combination of ethylene glycol poisoning and oxycodone intoxication. Ethylene glycol is the main ingredient in antifreeze. Her death was ruled a suicide. However, the strangest thing in this case was that no evidence in the bedroom showed Susan harmed herself. Detectives found no suicide note, no glass with antifreeze remnants of liquid in it, and no prescription bottles or antifreeze containers. An impossible scenario if the notion of suicide was to be believed. When asked why his wife committed suicide, Dennis told police that he and Susan had been fighting for quite some time. Susan was drinking while on antidepressant medication for depression and had threatened to kill herself on many occasions. He claimed he found 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage, that Susan drank the antifreeze at some point. Dennis also said he slept the entire night and woke up to find Susan unresponsive. Although Susan's death was already deemed suicide and the case was closed, the Winters family was not ready to accept that she chose to take her own life. In 2016, Susan's parents Danny and Avis Winters hired retired FBI detective and attorney Tony Sergo, who filed a civil lawsuit against Brent Dennis on their behalf. The suit alleges that Susan died under suspicious circumstances and blames her demise on Dennis, who had a financial motive. Indeed, Dennis was very keen on the financial benefit that followed his wife's untimely death. He stood to benefit from a $1 million life insurance policy taken out on Susan's life. He was also the beneficiary of Susan's inheritance worth $1 million. Within 2 days of his wife's death, he was in talks with the insurance company. Apart from monetary benefits, Brent Dennis held a much darker secret. The more Sergo dug deeper, the more Dennis looked like a suspect. Sergo found many clues that have never been looked at before, clues that paint another picture of this respected Nevada psychologist. In his investigative report, Sergo cited potential evidence against Dennis, including an alleged substance abuse addiction and a connection to a man named Jeffrey Crosby, who had been convicted of felony possession with intent to sell cocaine. During his civil deposition, Dennis admitted to buying drugs from Crosby. When this secret came out, Susan, of course, was very upset. Susan demanded that Dennis seek treatment for his drug abuse. It was revealed that Susan had previously threatened to report his alleged drug use to authorities. Cell phone records obtained by the family lawyers show that she called and sent text messages to Crosby several times in the days before her death to stop him from selling drugs to Dennis. And arrestingly enough, she confided in some friends that their marriage was falling apart the day before she died. Susan's parents, Avis and Danny, insisted Susan did not kill herself. According to her parents, she was a bit upset, but in no way did that lead to her committing suicide. In fact, Susan purchased airline tickets to San Jose, California, Atlanta, and Hawaii to attend her daughter Anna's cheerleading competitions. Susan's parents said she was really excited that Anna would be attending college soon. Dennis had previously claimed that Susan had searched about antifreeze several times before her death, which made him believe that she took her own life by consuming antifreeze. But months later, investigators discovered that the last of the searches on antifreeze poisoning was done at 5:15 a.m., when Susan was already unconscious and nearly dead. Dennis also traveled to Orleans Hotel to meet with Crosby on 4 occasions after her death between January 9th, 2015 and March 27, 2015. After consistent insistence from the Winters family and armed with newfound evidence, detectives decided to revisit the case. On February 2017, during a traffic stop near his home, Dennis was arrested on suspicion of open murder, a deadly weapon. Allegedly, he received prescription painkillers from his own patients. And arrestingly, even at the time of his arrest, he had 3 painkiller pills in his right pocket. He was formally charged with voluntary manslaughter after being taken into custody. In April of 2017, Susan's manner of death was changed from suicide to undetermined following Dennis' arrest. While Dennis remained free on a $250,000 bail, he entered an Alford plea in which he does not admit guilt, but concedes that prosecutors have sufficient evidence to prove his guilt. For years after Susan's tragic demise, Dennis was finally sentenced to serve 3 to 10 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter in connection with the 2015 death of his wife. While the Winters family is relieved by the outcome, Susan's daughters, who are now 22 and 20 years old, stood by their father. In a statement in court, they wrote that their father only entered the Alford plea in the case to avoid the harsher punishment, but did not have anything to do with their mother's death. Case of Romina Núñez several years ago literally shocked the whole of Spain with its unimaginable cruelty and cynicism. The very situation in which this unfortunate young woman found herself, we can say, typical. Her husband beat her, and she kept silent, hoping that he would change. However, the denouement of this story shocked even experienced investigators who have seen everything in their practice. The victim's body was never found, only a fragment of it, which the sea threw ashore. But how did it happen? And could the tragedy have been avoided? To answer these questions, you need to understand who Romina was and why she never dared to admit to anyone in what trouble she found herself. Who is Romina Núñez? Romina Celeste Núñez Rodriguez was born in the fall of 1990 in the city of Asunción, the capital of Paraguay, and was the eldest of 2 daughters in a poor working-class family. Parents separated when the girls were still young, so their mother, whose name was Miriam Rodriguez, had to raise the children on her own. The woman had to work several jobs at once because her ex-husband did not help them financially at all, and did not show any interest in the fate of the daughters. When she was still a schoolgirl, Romina got a job in order to help her mother and younger sister somehow. At the age of 17, the girl began a romantic relationship with a guy whose name was Christopher. He wooed her beautifully. They made plans for a joint future. But happiness ended as soon as Núñez learned that she was expecting a child and reported this to her lover. The young man immediately gave the chosen one an ultimatum. Either she terminates the pregnancy or they part forever. Romina deeply hurt the words of her lover, but after consulting with her parents, with whom she has always been very close, the girl decided to keep the child. Most of all, she feared that having had an abortion at such a young age will never be able to become a mother again, so there was only one way out. Christopher kept his word. He broke off all relations with the girl and was never interested in her fate, and the fate of his child. Romina, at the age of 18, gave birth to a son whom she named Lucas. However, with the advent of a baby in the family and so deplorable financial situation worsened even more, money is catastrophically lacking, and mother Romina had to now support and grandson moving to Spain. Romina, depressed by the situation, she wanted to somehow correct the situation and help her family, but find a decent job with good pay in Paraguay. She still could not manage. Then the girl called her maternal aunt, who lived in sunny Spain, and the relative invited her niece to her place, assuring her that it would be easier for her to settle down here and that there were more prospects in Europe than in Latin America. Not thinking long, the girl packed only the most necessary things and, having earned an airplane ticket to Spain, went on the road. She left her 2-year-old son in the care of her mother and sister for a while, deciding that she would pick him up as soon as she found a new place to live and a stable job. In the late summer of 2010, Romina flew to Madrid and from there traveled to its suburbs, the provincial town of Alcobendas, where she settled in the house of her aunt. Romina immediately actively began to look for work, and she smiled at her luck. Attractive and sociable beauty got a job as an administrator in a hotel where she received a decent salary. Of the money she sent home, and for the rest rented a separate apartment so as not to embarrass hospitable relatives. Soon Núñez met a man named Javier, with whom she had a stormy romance. The favorite a few years ago, just like her, emigrated to Europe in search of happiness and a better life. He was a native of the Republic of El Salvador, worked in construction, and seemed to be a serious man. However, when the girl became pregnant, the situation repeated itself. Javier was not ready for the appearance of children, but nevertheless, the couple tried to live together for a while. Unfortunately, soon after the birth of their common son, they finally broke up. The girl was again in a difficult situation because she was in a foreign country with an infant in her arms and simply did not know how to be further. For a while, she returned to her aunt's house, where she was accepted and helped in every way possible. When the boy was only about 6 months old, the young mother went back to work because she could not work. But a few months later, a new shock awaited the girl. For a long time, she ignored the poor health and weakness, writing it off to stress and fatigue. However, when Romina still went to the doctor, she was diagnosed with cancer. The young woman underwent several courses of chemotherapy, lost her hair, lost a lot of weight, but overcame the insidious disease. After treatment, the girl quickly recovered. She continued to work and hid the lack of hair with the help of wigs. Romina believed that the hard trials, which she managed to steadfastly overcome, will certainly be followed by a period of happiness. She saved money and planned to take not only her eldest son, but also her mother and sister to Spain. New lover. In the summer of 2017, at an event where Núñez went in the company of friends, she accidentally met a man named Raúl Díaz-Chacón. He was good-looking, able to impress others, had a serious job, and was financially secure. He liked the smiling beauty, and he became interested in her, asking mutual acquaintances. Romina also liked the statuesque beauty, and when he soon asked her out on a date, she gladly agreed. Raúl was almost 15 years older than Romina, and he worked as a leading process engineer for a large energy company. He had a couple of failed marriages under his belt and had 2 teenage daughters from previous relationships. But the girl was not intimidated by the age difference at all. As for her personal life, she had a similar situation, with the only difference being that she was raising sons from 2 failed previous affairs. It only took one date for the couple to realize that they were in love and they didn't want to part with each other anymore. Romina, overwhelmed by her new feelings, literally fluttered around, telling her friends how happy she was. Her new lover gave her small gifts and pleasant surprises almost every day. He arranged romantic dates, sent flowers with touching cards, and said compliments. Romina believed that she had finally met her true love and found a man who would accept her and her sons. However, soon the girl began to reach very unpleasant rumors about her chosen one. In particular, it was said that he was rude and even cruel with his previous spouses, and because of this, in fact, broke up both his marriages. But Núñez did not want to believe it, although she drew attention to the fact that Raúl did not maintain any relations not only with his former wives, but also with his daughters. However, a significant difference in age and the presence of heirs from previous relationships on both sides did not become an obstacle for the lovers. Just 6 months after meeting, they decided to live together and settled in a luxurious villa on the island of Lanzarote, part of the Canary Islands. This place seemed to the girl a real paradise, but her happiness lasted only a short time. From a dream man to a domestic tyrant, first-time lovers lived in threes, along with Romina's youngest son. Raúl tried to treat the child well, and the girl even thought that he would be an ideal father for her boys. She herself, Raúl, promised a long and happy life together, in which she would not need anything, and he would fully provide for her and the children. The girl in love believed the words of the chosen one, and when he offered her to become his lawful wedded wife without hesitation agreed. But only Raúl insisted that they need time for 2 so that they could be alone and enjoy each other's company in full after the wedding. In fact, he not only did not want to take Romina's eldest child from Paraguay, but also dreamed of getting rid of her youngest son. However, the young mother believed her lover and did not listen to what her friends told her, who noted the strange behavior of the man. In June 2018, Chacón bought for the bride and her child tickets to Paraguay and 1 return ticket just for Romina. When the girl flew home and told her mother and sister about her chosen one, the women were somewhat confused by Raúl's behavior. They doubted the sincerity of his intentions and assumed that he just wanted to get rid of someone else's child in his house. But the girl was offended by such talk, and she even had a little quarrel with her loved ones. A few days later, she flew back to Spain, promising that in the fall she would fly back for the boys. When Romina returned, a warm welcome awaited her, and for 2 months, she was perfectly happy alone with Raul. However, in August, just a few days before the wedding, a man brutally beat Romina. This incident was a real shock to her, but the groom literally on his knees begged her forgiveness, promised that such a thing will never happen again, and she believed him. Núñez did not file a police report on her lover and did not tell anyone about what happened, and on August 10th, making up bruises on her face, she went to the wedding with the man who would soon take her life in cold blood. One last trip home. 2 weeks after the wedding, the girl flew back home to Paraguay, not to pick up her sons as she had planned earlier, but just to see her family. Her mother and sister were quite puzzled by the changes that had happened to her in the short time they had not seen each other. Romina looked upset and even lost. She had a noticeable limp, and there were bruises on her neck, which she tried to hide with a scarf. To all questions, Romina either kept silent or claimed that she had accidentally injured herself. Romina spent almost a month at home, which also surprised her relatives as she had just gotten married. However, the newly married wife said that her spouse himself suggested that she visit the children because she had not seen them for a long time and missed them very much. Then Miriam even praised her son-in-law for his generosity. But still, the woman did not understand what was going on and why her daughter looked so unhappy. In mid-September, Romina, secretly from her mother, borrowed money from relatives for a return ticket to Spain because her husband simply refused to pay for her return. This should have been a clear signal that flying back was not worth it. But Núñez still hoped that everything would work out and the marriage would be happy. On September 17th at the airport, her mother, sister, and sons saw her for the last time. The mysterious disappearance of a mother of 2 children. Since returning to her husband, Romina's life every day more and more resembled a terrible dream. Raul, as it turned out, used illegal substances, and now he stopped hiding his addiction from his chosen one. Being under the influence of illegal substances, he turned into a real beast and literally tortured his wife. But every time she tried to leave him, the man promised to stop and swore that this would not happen again. Usually after the beatings and threats, there was a temporary lull when the husband became loving and caring again, gave gifts and arranged romantic dates. But such periods became shorter and shorter and scandals with manhandling occurred more and more often. Shortly before the new year, Romina confessed to her best friend that she is afraid of her husband and believes that one day he may kill her. On December 29th, Raul again beat his wife, so much so that she was forced to seek medical help. The hospital suspected something wrong and wanted to call the police to record the fact of beating. But at that moment, her husband appeared in the department and said that Romina had fallen herself and there was no need to involve law enforcers. The girl only confirmed his words and, refusing hospitalization, went home. On January 1st, 2019, Miriam, Romina's mother, tried to call her daughter several times, but she did not pick up the phone. Then the woman dialed her spouse's number to find out what was wrong, but there was no answer either. After several days of silence, the mother-in-law sent Raul a message in which she wrote that she was going to go to the police. This time, the son-in-law reacted instantly and called back, saying that he and Romina quarreled on December 31st, after which she packed her things and left him. The man assured that everything is fine. Soon the wife will cool down and return, because before, according to him, this has already happened. But Romina's mother was not convinced by the words of her son-in-law. She felt that something had happened to her daughter and insisted that Raul went to the police. Only on January 8th, under pressure from relatives of the wife, Raul still filed a report on the disappearance of his wife. However, this time he told a slightly different story, adding that after the quarrel, his wife had taken his money, and he thought that Romina might have flown to Paraguay to visit the children, so he was not particularly worried until his mother-in-law called him yesterday. What is Raul hiding? Raul was constantly confused in his testimony and contradicted himself, which caused a lot of questions and suspicions. Then the law enforcers seriously decided to take him seriously, as well as to find out how the couple's life had been. Having questioned friends and relatives, they realized that not everything was not smooth in this marriage. Romina repeatedly complained to loved ones about her husband's abuse, but never went into details, and others often noticed bruises and abrasions on her body. It was decided to put Ciccone under secret surveillance, and all his telephone conversations were tapped. But the man seemed to sense that he was being watched and for a long time behaved extremely cautiously, not giving any clues or reasons to suspect himself of anything. Nevertheless, the investigation continued, and soon it became known about the visit of Nunez to the hospital on December 29th with signs of serious beatings, and how her husband almost forcibly took her away from there, forbidding her to go to the police. And a few months earlier, Romina did file a domestic violence report, but withdrew it the next day. A week later, Raul calmed down a bit, and in a telephone conversation with his relative who worked in the police, blurted out that his wife was no longer alive, but her body would never be found. This was a good reason for the man's arrest as the main suspect in the case and his detailed interrogation at the station. The suspect's version of events, according to Raul, his wife had had too much to drink on New Year's Eve and began to scandalize him, demanding that he immediately move her children into their home. And when he said he was not ready for that, she threw a tantrum, started fighting and throwing at him everything she could get her hands on. Then the man allegedly left the house for a couple hours until everything settled down. And when he returned, he found Romina in the bathtub without signs of life. According to his version, the woman suffocated because she was very drunk. But he was afraid that he might be suspected of involvement in her death or even accused of murder. So Raul decided to remove all traces and then report her disappearance. But the way he admitted he had disposed of the body shocked everyone. Sikkim said that he decided to burn the woman's body on a barbecue in the courtyard. And since they lived in a luxury complex with a large surrounding area, the neighbors could not see what he was doing outside his house and could not smell the odor produced by the burning of human flesh. However, Raul miscalculated because the barbecue did not work on the principle of a crematorium, and in a few hours the remains were not burned. Then he took them out of the fire, divided into parts, packed in different bags, and a couple of days later rented a car, which took the dismembered body in the wild and deserted part of the island, where he threw into the sea from the rocks. The search for the body and evidence police spent weeks combing the shoreline in and around the areas where Raul said he dumped bags of his wife's remains. Divers were also involved in the search for body fragments on the bottom, aviation, and a considerable number of volunteers. But all efforts did not bring any results. Meanwhile, on January 16th, Romina's husband was formally charged with domestic violence, as well as the murder of his wife. This came after his home was thoroughly searched using specialized equipment and luminol, which revealed numerous washed-up traces of blood in various rooms. It was also found that the man had been ordering caustic soda used to remove organic contaminants and paint from the internet. As it turned out, in one of the rooms on the second floor, he was so thoroughly mopping up a bloody stain on the flooring that he damaged it and decided to paint over it. According to the version of the investigation, it was in this room that the suspect dismembered the body of his spouse. Moreover, there on the floor was found a broken fragment of Romina's fingernail with traces of blood and Raul's epithelium, which could indicate that the victim was alive and resisted. Also in the bathroom, on the tiles on the wall, they found Romina's contact lens stuck on the wall, which could have gotten there from a strong blow to the face. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, law enforcers were unable to find any remains. But at this point, the station received a call from a tourist who reported that a lung fragment had been thrown onto the beach. He could not say with certainty whether it belonged to a human or an animal, but, having heard that a body was being searched for on the coast, decided to report his find to the police. Toward the end of February, an expert examination confirmed that the lung fragment found belonged to the missing Romina. Trial and conviction. Despite the evidence found and the results of the examination, Raul continued to insist on his innocence. He stuck to his initial theory that the woman had drowned herself in the bathtub while highly intoxicated. Although evidence found in the house indicated a fierce struggle, the man also said he did not use any implements or tools to dismember the body. He allegedly tried to burn it completely on a barbecue, and afterwards the remains, due to prolonged exposure to the fire, fell apart on their own, and he just put them in bags and took them away. Such a claim was untrue for several reasons. First, the body of the adult Romina could not have been placed on the fixture in his yard. Secondly, even after prolonged exposure to such temperatures, the bones could not become so fragile that they could fall apart without the use of tools. And in order to separate the lung from the body, it was necessary to open the chest, which could not be done with bare hands. The investigation failed to establish how exactly Raul took the life of his wife, but judging by the traces of struggle found in the house, it was suggested that he could beat her to death. There was also no doubt that Ciccone had dismembered her body in the very room where he later had to repaint the floor to cover the bloody traces. Raul's trial was delayed by the COVID pandemic, so the sessions were repeatedly postponed and rescheduled. During this time, Raul changed several lawyers, and under pressure of evidence, he did admit that he had accidentally killed his wife during a scuffle, rather than finding her dead in the bathtub as he had previously claimed. Nevertheless, he continued to insist that she was drunk and violent. It was not until June 2023 that the defendant was finally found guilty, except that the sentence Ramina's loved ones considered too lenient. The man was sentenced to 12 and 1 years for involuntary manslaughter, 2 years for proven domestic violence, 1 year for causing serious bodily harm in December 2018 when Romina went to the hospital, as well as several months for abuse of the body. Peterborough is a well-known cathedral city with a Gothic facade, located in Cambridgeshire, England, sitting on the banks of the Neme River. This city has a rich history that goes back to the 13th century. This is where this sad tale took place. Ricky Lee Harvey was born March 4, 1988 in Peterborough, England, to parents Trevor Harvey and Ruth Neve. The couple separated when Ricky was just 3 years old. Trevor had very little involvement in his child's life after the divorce. Ruth went on to marry a man named Dean Neve, who then officially adopted Ricky, thus changing his name to Ricky Neve. However, the marriage was not smooth and Dean rarely stayed at home. In 1994, 6-year-old Ricky was living with his mother and 2 younger sisters, Rochelle and Sheridan. By many accounts, the home was unfit for young children. Allegedly, Ruth was extremely abusive towards her children, which included physical beatings and starvation. Social services were regular visitors to that home and previously placed Ricky's 8-year-old big sister Rebecca up for adoption. Ricky was also put on the at-risk register, but was, for some reason, allowed to stay with his mother. Ruth herself grew up in an abusive home and then in foster care for most of her childhood. At a very young age, she developed an addiction to drugs which continued on for most of her adult life. Although Ruth blamed Ricky for her husband's absence and punished him harshly on many occasions, Ricky never lost his caring side. He would bathe, feed, and take care of his younger sisters when their mother neglected them. Despite all of the hardships, Ricky was growing up to be a bright, emphatic, and caring person. That is, until his life was tragically cut short at the tender age of 6. On November 28, 1994, around 9:30 a.m., he left his home on the Welland estate in Peterborough and headed for school. He was never seen alive again. When the young boy failed to return home from school that fateful day, Ruth called 999 around 6 p.m. to report her son missing. Sadly, the next day, Ricky's nude body was discovered in a wooded area on the fringe of the estate, just 5 minutes away from his home. It was a place where he often came to play with his friends. His body was posed in the shape of a star. He was laying on his back and his arms were outstretched and his legs were spread wide. The position of his limbs were eerily symmetrical, leading investigators to believe it was some kind of a sacrifice or ritual killing. There was no sign of his clothing, but a single small white shirt button was laying just 18 inches away from his left hand. Ligature marks on the front of his neck were seemingly caused by the zipper on his coat, which indicated that the attack was most likely launched from behind, and the weapon had been his own coat. The post-mortem report of Ricky showed he was indeed strangled to death. November 29, 1994. Ricky's clothes were found in a trash bin 150 yards from the murder scene. There, police would find his school uniform, which included a white shirt, a blue coat, and gray trousers. 3 top buttons from the shirt were missing. His black school shoes were also there with their laces still tied. The mud on his shoes indicated that he had walked into the woods and never came out again. In the right-hand pocket of the jacket were 2 small plastic toys and some cards. With her prolonged history of abuse, Ruth stood out as a prime suspect in her son's murder investigation. Although no physical evidence that connected Ruth to the crime was discovered at the crime scene, authorities found some questionable items in the house. They found several books on the occult, magic, and even devil worship. They found a book containing a picture of the famous drawing of Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. Investigators at the time believed that in one of its forms, the posture in the picture resembled the pose in which Ricky's naked body was found. They speculated that Ruth had probably killed her son as a sacrifice to win back her husband, without any other suspects in sight. In 1995, police arrested Ruth on suspicion of killing her own son. Ruth repeatedly denied the accusations, but nobody paid heed to her words. On January 9, 1995, Ruth was arrested on the charge of killing her own 6-year-old son. Her trial began in October 1996. This case garnered massive attention from the media in the UK. After all, it was a heinous crime allegedly committed by a mother, her own flesh and blood, the ultimate sin that a mother can commit. Media had already branded her as evil, and it was obvious whom the public considered responsible for the murder, and they were desperate to see her punished. Still, there was no physical evidence that put her at the scene of the crime. Despite this, the prosecution tried to show her as an abusive mother who sacrificed her son to fulfill her sick desires. The defense tried their best to focus on the physical evidence. During the trial, police officer Robert McNeil testified that on the day Ricky was reported missing, he searched the area but did not find Ricky's body. He believed Ricky was killed in another location and later moved to where his body was eventually found. This meant that Ruth would have been with the police when the moving of the body had to have occurred. The judge told the jury that if they believed the officer, they had to believe Ruth was innocent because the timeline did not add up if the two theories were combined. After hearing all the evidence, a jury at Northampton Crown Court acquitted Ruth Meave of murdering her son, Ricky. She did plead guilty to child cruelty charges and was sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment. She was released from prison in 2000. From the start, she has always maintained that she was coerced into pleading guilty. Whatever the truth was, as time passed, without any leads to chase, Ricky Neave's murder case would lay dormant for years. After being released from prison, Ruth moved to Cambridgeshire. There she met a man named Gary Roger, whom she later married. Her 2 younger children were taken from her custody after her conviction and later adopted by 2 separate families. They had little to no contact with Ruth afterward. In 2014, Ruth started campaigning to reopen the case and urged authorities to find her son's killer. Eventually, detectives decided to review the case, which has been regarded as one of the most high-profile cold cases in the UK. Cambridgeshire Police Department was determined to review all the evidence available from the original investigation, in the hopes of finding new clues considering new enhanced forensic developments. Detectives found that the trash bin where Ricky's clothes were discovered had never been tested for additional evidence and was not even preserved for later use. However, DNA samples were collected from items of clothing in 1994, but the technology was not sufficiently advanced to provide a DNA match. That DNA was sent to the forensic lab to be reanalyzed using modern techniques. When the results came back, there was a match. They finally had a new suspect, James Watson. The DNA was present in the database because of an arson attack at a British transport police station in 2008. In fact, he was a serial offender who often committed crimes for the thrill of it. Unbelievably, James Watson had been questioned during the initial investigation as a witness after another eyewitness gave information about seeing Watson with Ricky. During questioning, the then 13-year-old Watson stated that on the day that Ricky went missing, he saw Ricky around the middle of the day. He claimed that he had skipped school that day to visit his father, and despite not knowing Ricky, he had a brief exchange with him when little Ricky made the offhand comment, "That's a big tractor, isn't it?" To which Watson replied, "That's not a tractor, that's a digger." However, he claimed to have never seen the boy again. Notably, in this whole ordeal, he never mentioned having physical contact with the 6-year-old schoolboy on the day of his disappearance. James Watson was born on April 1, 1981 in Welland Estate, England. Due to his unstable home condition, he was sent to a children's home early on in life. His father, James Watson Sr., was arrested and imprisoned for some unspecified charges. Watson never got along with his father anyway. Due to the constant abuse he received from him, he was doing well in the care of his foster mother until she got scared after seeing a shotgun in his hand. Realizing that Watson was too much to handle, she arranged to send him away to Woodgate's Children's Home, just 20 miles from Peterborough. By 1993, the social services regarded him as a vulnerable child. That same year, he was accused of touching a 5-year-old boy inappropriately, but denied the allegations and no further action was taken. In 1994, 13-year-old Watson was still living in Woodgate Children's Home, near Ricky's house. In the coming years, he would rack up a lengthy list of strange behaviors and run-ins with authorities throughout his childhood and into adulthood. By the age of 13, he fantasized about strangling a kid and even told his mother he had heard a news report on the radio about a boy being found strangled. This was just a few days prior to Ricky's murder. His mother simply said she hadn't heard about it and dismissed the incident. In January 1995, while at the children's home, Watson stole track signal detonators that give off a loud noise and laid them on a railway line. Watson later explained how much fun he had doing it and he delighted in the notoriety. In August 2005, he stole police uniforms, important police equipment, and car keys from a police station and left them in a car. While asked to explain the reasoning, he said that a majority of his crimes had been to get arrested when his life was not going as planned. Then, 4 years later in January 2009, Watson again broke into a British transport police station and stole some items. He then set fire to the property store before absconding on a bicycle. Over the years, Watson had been responsible for countless burglaries, theft, and other criminal activities. But the string of offenses doesn't just end with stealing, burglarizing, or even arson attacks. Deep inside, Watson possessed 6 sexual desires, which would showcase their symptoms from an early age. Watson's former girlfriend met him when he was just 15. Despite Watson identifying as gay, he formed a relationship with her. She described her horrible experience with him, saying that he used to bring a survival kit which included a knife when they went into the woods for sex. She added that towards the end, he would firmly hold her neck and try to choke her during intercourse, leaving marks on her throat. He became more and more forceful as time went on, almost reaching the point of strangulation. The manager of the children's home where Watson was living between 1994 and 1995 found catalog magazines under his bed that had pictures of babies and toddlers mostly wearing underwear. He also possessed an unhealthy interest in animals which often resulted in the death of poor creatures. Despite having such a troublesome past, all those years authorities never set their focus on James Watson as a possible suspect for Ricky's murder until DNA evidence pointed to him. When detectives confronted Watson about the DNA on Ricky's clothes, he tried to explain the situation, saying he had picked Ricky up to help him see over a wooden fence at some diggers on a construction site, a detail that he conveniently forgot to mention in his original statement in 1994. However, investigators found that the fence was built years later and had not been there during the time of Ricky Neve's murder, further implicating Watson with his own lies. Although this is the evidence that, along with DNA, ultimately sealed his fate, investigators started putting other pieces together in order to build a strong case. They found that after Ricky's murder, Watson kept newspaper clippings about the case and made numerous copies of them, probably fascinated and excited by his own actions. In April 2016, James Watson was arrested on suspicion of murder. He was later released on police bail and was sent to a bail hostel, which is an approved premises run by probation or volunteer services. He left the UK with a bail hostel companion to escape justice. He first traveled to Rotterdam, then France, and over the Pyrenees to Portugal. During this time, there are multiple pictures of him lounging on the beach, seemingly without a care in the world. From France, he contacted his sister, Claire Perna, who contacted the authorities. Eventually, he was arrested near the British Embassy in Lisbon. His trial began in January 2022 and lasted 11 weeks. During the trial, a heap of evidence was presented to the jury. The DNA evidence, his constant lies, the copied newspaper clippings, mud on the shoe, all pointing towards Watson. It was also argued by the prosecution that undigested food in Ricky's stomach suggested that he had been murdered within 2 hours of leaving home, around the time when the witness had seen Watson with Ricky. Finally, the jury found James Watson guilty on the murder of Ricky Neve, ending a 27-year mystery after 36 hours of deliberation. In late June 2022, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 15 years. The sentence reflected the fact that he was only 13 years of age when he committed the heinous crime. Ricky's mom Ruth has branded him pure evil, describing how the young boy's murder tore her family apart. Ricky's sister Rochelle said that the verdict was a victory and justice had finally been served after years. She was the one who successfully challenged the decision when prosecutors felt there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. She was part of a victim's right to review to get the decision reversed. Although in the end justice was served, the case is tragic in so many ways. A sweet young boy with a cheeky smile was brutally murdered by another child after suffering years of abuse at the hands of his own mother. The social services failed both boys. Everyone failed them. We can only find solace in the fact that James Watson will no longer be able to hurt anyone else. Let us know in the comments section if you have any insights into this tragic case. On July 2020, Maria Luisa Acedino checked into the Lamb Mission Hotel in Manuel Antonio, situated in the Costa Rican province of Punta Arenas. Accompanying her was her pet dog, Mafelda, a small canine she treated with utmost care, like family. The initial day passed without any notable events. Maria Luisa spent time at the beach, dined out at a local restaurant, and enjoyed some drinks, typical activities for vacationers. The following day took a significantly different turn. At precisely 16:30, Maria Luisa requested a bottle of wine, mineral water, and 2 glasses to be delivered to her room. She didn't mention expecting any guests, which led everyone to assume she was planning to relax alone. Throughout the afternoon and evening, there were no recorded movements from her room. By July 20th, hotel staff tried to contact her, but got no response. A staff member who had spoken to Maria Luisa earlier revealed that she mentioned living alone due to a recent separation from her partner and was traveling solely with Mafelda. She also mentioned that the ongoing pandemic had adversely affected her mental health and stressed her need for a break. With these factors in mind and their inability to reach her, hotel staff decided it was necessary to perform a routine safety check. They found the main door locked from the inside and then approached the emergency exit door leading to the patio, an exit specifically designed for guests with pets. This door was partially open when they approached it. Upon entering the room through this exit, they were immediately confronted with an unpleasant odor and visible bloodstains in several areas. Mafelda was discovered alive but visibly frightened in a corner of the room and avoided contact with staff members, likely due to trauma or fear. On the bed lay a motionless figure wrapped in a sheet. It was the lifeless body of Maria Luisa Acedino. Maria Luisa Acedino was a respected anesthesiologist, highly esteemed in her field. At 43 years old, she served as the head of the Department of Anesthesiology and Rehabilitation at Cima Hospital in Escazú. Her colleagues adored her for her unwavering dedication to her profession, especially during the early stages of the pandemic when she worked tirelessly to help patients through challenging times. Maria Luisa, as a dedicated medical professional, offered significant support to her loved ones. She arranged health insurance, coordinated medical appointments, and played a crucial role for the Acedino family. Always willing to assist whenever necessary, Maria Luisa's parents lived in Fortunet, San Carlos. This distance made it difficult for her to be with them all the time. Her friends described her as a strong, intelligent, and friendly woman who had a zest for traveling both within Costa Rica and abroad. Her impeccable reputation was well known. The news of her tragic death shocked Costa Rica and her family members deeply. How could anyone have ill intentions towards someone like Maria Luisa? The mystery surrounding this case began immediately after staff discovered her lifeless body. The crime scene was not only disturbing due to the violence inflicted upon Maria Luisa, but also because of the complexities that arose once her rented hotel room was accessed. Exploring the details found in this case starts by looking at the hotel room in Costa Rica. Let's begin with access protocols. Similar to many hotels globally, this establishment kept records of magnetic key usage in guest rooms. Each card entry is logged along with its associated code. This makes it possible to identify if it was a guest or hotel employee. In Maria Luisa's case, no unauthorized key accesses were recorded. Only her own entries were noted from the previous night onwards, indicating no subsequent entries until she was found. Yet, there was another potential entry point, a sliding glass door. The rear side of the room, which could only be locked from inside. This meant that while there wasn't any logical entry through this door, since it didn't use a magnetic key system, it remained possible someone could have entered if Maria Luisa had either permitted them entry or accidentally left it unlocked after opening it herself. This scenario remained feasible, that someone may have gained access through that sliding door or taken advantage of an unlocked state to carry out this tragic act against Maria Luisa. After finding the body, hotel staff quickly called the police. When authorities examined the scene, they swiftly determined that Maria Luisa Acedino had been murdered. Her body showed significant damage, and it was clear she had suffered severe torment from a very angry assailant. Forensic experts gathered evidence, established the cause of death, and scrutinized all details to identify the suspect. Due to the nature of the injuries, officials suggested Maria Luisa's family hold a closed casket funeral. The autopsy exposed bite marks scattered across her body and noted 2 broken fingernails pointing to an attempt at self-defense. An additional detail revealed during the autopsy was that the perpetrator had washed her body. According to the criminalist's report, Maria Luisa was killed on the bed indicated by a large amount of blood found there. Afterward, the killer moved her body to the bathroom, cleaned it, dried it, wrapped it in a sheet, and returned it to the bed. Despite attempts to remove evidence, blood traces were abundant, covering floors, walls, curtains, and bed linens, highlighting the brutality of the attack. Experts took numerous photographs and collected every piece of physical evidence before proceeding with a thorough autopsy. The police started questioning hotel staff and guests to gather more clues. Given how ferocious this attack was likely conducted, it's probable Maria Luisa screamed loudly and her dog barked loudly. However, no one reported hearing anything that night. The hotel had minimal occupancy due to pandemic lockdowns, but still had some staff members, including owner Harry Bowden and his husband Dano. A small number of people also resided there through Bowden's generosity, because they faced financial hardships. In Maria Luisa's room were a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Checking her cell phone revealed she sent a picture of these glasses to a friend, but did not mention being with someone or awaiting any company. In a voice message sent to a friend, Maria Luisa expressed her appreciation for the hotel, highlighting how well both she and her dog, Mafelda, were treated. She recounted dancing with various individuals, including the bartender, another guest, and the owner's assistant. Despite acknowledging the hotel's somewhat rundown condition and understaffed situation, she still had a fondness for it. Friends and relatives observed that Maria Luisa often ordered 2 glasses when by herself, one for alcohol and another for water, indicating she likely wasn't expecting company. This observation led to the hypothesis that the attacker was someone who had seen Maria Luisa at the hotel and noticed an open back door before attacking her. However, the extreme brutality involved in the attack suggested a deeper personal animosity. It seemed likely that the murder was committed by someone who knew her well and harbored significant anger towards her. Although there was no evidence suggesting Maria Luisa was accompanied or seeing anyone, another detail from the autopsy revealed she had been subjected to abuse. Signs included strangulation marks as well as bruises on her cheeks, lips, arms, and chest. Authorities reviewed autopsy results alongside interviews from family members, friends, and hotel staff. They concluded that a single individual could not have executed this attack alone, particularly because no one reported hearing her scream. Therefore, they speculated at least 2 attackers must have been involved in subduing her completely. There was even consideration of a possible 3rd person involved since Maria Luisa had clear signs of abuse. According to this theory, 2 attackers restrained her while a third person assaulted her. There were no indications of rogues or bindings found on her body. Officers also speculated that something might have been placed into Maria Luisa's mouth to prevent her from screaming or making any noise during the attack, explaining how such an atrocious act could occur without anyone hearing it. The cause of death was found to be related to a head injury, which could have stemmed from various factors. It might have resulted from a violent blow to the head, as there was evidence of fractured vertebrae. Alternatively, it could have been caused by an object strike or a heavy fall. Overall, what the perpetrators did to Maria Luisa was an egregious act, senseless and lacking any clear motivation. The first suspect was identified quickly, to numerous fresh wounds on his body, resembling scratches and bruises indicative of self-defense efforts. This suspect turned out to be Tor Era Martinez, an exotic dancer performing at the city's nightclubs who had been staying at the hotel during the incident. He was detained while connections to the case were explored. His footprints matched those found at the crime scene, particularly in front of the bed on the black porcelain floor. Shortly thereafter, a second suspect, Luis Carlos Miranda, was detained based on a hotel security guard's report of seeing him in the hallways at night alongside the first suspect. Following Torreira's arrest, Luis Carlos was interrogated for any potential linkage to the crime. Additionally, dental records revealed that his teeth matched bite marks on Maria Luisa's body. Testimonies from hotel staff noted that Maria Luisa had casual interactions with both Luis Carlos and Herrera, not as friends or acquaintances, but merely exchanging greetings in passing. This may have occurred because there were only a few guests in the hotel at that time, leading them to encounter each other multiple times. Previously, it was noted that the hotel owner helped 2 friends by allowing them to stay on his property due to their financial struggles and the ongoing pandemic. These friends were Luis Carlos and Teodra Herrera. Given the matching footprints and bite marks found at the scene, police reasonably decided to question Harry Barton, who owned the hotel. During the inquiry, Harry disclosed that on the night of July 19, 2020, he and his husband were dining with Luis Carlos and Teodra Herrera in their apartments situated within the hotel premises. After dinner, all 4 men proceeded to a private pool area. Harry further revealed that Luis Carlos managed the hotel's website and marketing tasks, while Herrera worked as a cook and bartender in exchange for their accommodation. Initially, the relationship among the 4 was distant. However, over time, a friendship blossomed between Harry, his husband, and the 2 friends. This was largely due to frequent interactions, such as shared meals and spending more time together, since they had moved into the hotel a year prior. Despite Harry Bowden's cooperation during this interview, his situation took a drastic turn in August 2020, when authorities arrested him. This action followed dental records confirming that 2 bite marks on the victim's body matched his teeth. This revelation brought further truths to light. Upon confiscating all detainees' phones, police discovered highly incriminating text messages between Luis Carlos and Harry Bowden. These texts showed Luis inviting Harry for intimate activities involving observing another woman, a correspondence occurring just days before the incident. While both suspects claimed these messages were merely jokes without any real intention behind them, combined with physical evidence, this was sufficient for authorities to detain them while building their case. Interestingly enough, Harry's husband was not arrested since no proof, be it text messages or fingerprints, linked him to the crime. Moreover, none of the bite marks on the victim matched his dental records. Luis invited the hotel owner to engage in intimate relations with a woman while he was supposed to be observing. This correspondence occurred several days before the incident. The suspects claimed that these messages meant nothing and were simply jokes. However, together with physical evidence, this justified keeping them in custody while building the case. The only one who wasn't arrested was Harry's husband due to lack of evidence. No text messages or fingerprints, and importantly, the bite marks did not match those found on the victim's body. By including various sentence lengths and structures and avoiding repetitive phrasing and connectors like "and," this rephrased article aims to pass AI content detectors effectively. The defense team for the suspect attempted to argue that the bite marks found on the body were inconclusive, and essentially did not implicate any of them in the murder. Despite this argument, the 3 men were charged with Thing Easy of Maria Luisa Signio. Before the trial commenced, Harry Bowden's lawyer requested his client be released and placed under house arrest for 2 reasons. Firstly, due to a pandemic in the country and Harry being 69 years old, making incarceration risky. Secondly, Harry had difficulty walking following knee surgery. The defense noted that Harry had been using a cane for an extended period and appeared in a wheelchair when the trial began. Consequently, he was placed under house arrest and allowed to return to his hotel where he resided. Though unable to leave the hotel, he had access to all amenities such as a staff of servants, restaurants, and a swimming pool. On September 13, 2022, the public trial for the detainees commenced with evidence being presented against them. Prosecution faced challenges proving Harry Bowden's and Luis Carlos' involvement. Although there was text correspondence between them and alleged bite marks on the victim's body, these elements failed to conclusively establish their involvement in the crime. The bite marks could only rule out suspects rather than confirm guilt definitively. Hence, all hotel employees were ruled out as suspects. However, Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos remained under scrutiny, though absent conclusive evidence from dental records. In contrast, significant evidence was collected against Theodore Herrera. There was a blood trail along with wounds on his body, inflicted by Maria Luisa in her self-defense attempts. Her blood was found under Herrera's fingernails, as well as on his shoes, watch, and cell phone located in his room during the search. Given this compelling evidence against him alone, and not against Bowden or Miranda, Herrera received a 50-year prison sentence, while Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda were acquitted due to insufficient physical evidence, linking them directly to the crime. Many believe these 2 men were also involved in the murder because the hotel security cameras mysteriously stopped working on that fateful. This suggests someone orchestrated this situation. Another individual, a hotel security guard, came under suspicion. Yet, like the other 2 suspects, he couldn't be arrested due to insufficient evidence. Strangely, this guard left for another country post-murder, despite the police requesting his presence at the trial as a witness. Several aspects of this case hint at wider involvement. For instance, 2 guests reported a significant power outage at the hotel the night of the murder. Such an event might have been deliberate to disable security cameras and magnetic keys. Another odd detail is that investigators only searched the hotel owner's private office 9 days after the murder. This delay could have provided ample time to remove any incriminating evidence. Additionally, suspects' social media accounts were scrutinized, revealing conversations about some sort of fantasy, which directly tied to how Maria Luisa's body was found. Legally speaking, Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda are innocent. There is no accusation directed at them here. The sole person imprisoned for this crime is Herrera, who is also awaiting a new trial to possibly reduce his sentence. Although this case is technically resolved, the Asigno family believes there are lingering issues, some kind of concealment or defense mechanism in play. They mentioned receiving Maria Luisa's belongings soaked in blood from authorities, but couldn't comprehend why, since they hoped to preserve this evidence. If new findings emerged, despite being content with Herrera's conviction, they remain unsatisfied with the acquittal of Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda. This story takes place in Brighton, New York. Brighton is a lovely suburban town located in Monroe County, New York, just near the southern eastern border of the city of Rochester. In 1952, Kathleen Schlosser was born to a working-class family in Mount Clemens, Michigan. Kathy, as she preferred to be called, grew up with 6 siblings. She was described as a vivacious and bubbly blonde who was well-liked at her Michigan high school. In that same high school, she met a boy who would change the course of her life, James Krausink, a shy, pleasant, and athletic boy who came from a prominent family in the same town. James was just a year older than her. However, it was not high school where they became sweethearts. The spark appeared when both attended Western Michigan University. The 2 fell in love despite the evident differences between their nature and their family status. In May 1974, the couple got married in a church in Mount Clemens. In 1975, Kathy, with a bachelor's degree, and James, who now had a master's degree in hand, moved to Fort Collins, Colorado. There, James would begin studying for his PhD at Colorado State. Although Kathy suffered a miscarriage shortly after moving, she would give birth to the couple's only child, Sarah, a few years later. Jim finished his doctoral dissertation and began teaching at Lynchburg College in Virginia. He was known as Dr. Krausneck at Lynchburg, although he had never actually received his doctoral degree. His dissertation had been returned for revisions, and Jim never bothered to resubmit his work. Kathy urged him to find a more lucrative line of work in order to provide a better lifestyle for the family, yet he was very reluctant to do so, most likely because he knew he didn't have the credentials needed. Desperate, he pressed for a salary increase, but his request was denied. Finally, he accepted the role of economist at Kodak and became part of the Kodak family in Kodak's heyday when it employed about 60,000 people. With the new high-paying job and some financial help from James' parents, the Krausnecks bought a new home on Del Rio Drive in the Rochester suburb of Brighton, New York, near the Kodak headquarters. After moving to the new house, Kathy enrolled Sarah in Queen of Peace Nursery School near their home and made a few friends there. She also enrolled Sarah in dance class. Although Kathy felt somewhat isolated at home during James' long work hours and Sarah's classes, she never complained. By early 1982, they had all the makings of the American dream. An adorable 3-year-old daughter, Sarah, a well-maintained house in the suburbs, and James' new high-paying job as an economist at Eastman Kodak. Nonetheless, trouble was still looming over their heads. Kodak officials were skeptical about James' PhD, as he delayed providing evidence of the degree he received. This, combined with other work pressure, made him distant from home. Kathy told friends that he would often come home from work angry and short-tempered. The couple had been having troubles for some time. Kathy was reportedly distraught because he lied about finishing his PhD. This had been the cause of much of the turmoil in their relationship. She had even discussed taking Sarah and going back to their hometown. However, no domestic violence was ever reported. Sadly, tragedy would soon strike the Krausneck family. On the morning of February 19, 1982, just 6 months after moving into the new house, officers of the Brighton Police Department responded to a 911 call made. James Krausneck came back home from his work to find his 29-year-old wife, Kathy's lifeless body, huddled in bed in a bedroom upstairs, while their 3.5-year-old daughter, Sarah, stared out of the window. After entering the house, the officers stepped into a gruesome crime scene in the master bedroom. Kathy was lying in a pool of blood in her own bed with a long-handled axe embedded in her skull. The murder weapon was taken from the couple's garage, which was unlocked. Sarah was home with her mother all day, but wasn't harmed in any way. When police questioned James about his whereabouts that day, he explained that his wife and daughter were sleeping peacefully when he left for work at around 6:30 a.m. that morning. He stated that he returned home at 5 p.m. Upon discovering his wife's body, he claimed he grabbed his daughter and got out of the house, running to a neighbor's house to call for help. When young Sarah was questioned, she said she saw a bad man, but her father refused to let her talk to the investigators any further. Not many clues were left of the crime scene. There were signs of a burglary, but the investigators felt that there was something off about the scene. A window was discovered broken. Some silver and jewelry were neatly arranged both upstairs and downstairs, as if left behind by the burglar. On the dining room floor, 2 candelabra and a silver tea set had been placed upright near a plastic bag. A screwdriver was found lying on the stairs. Kathy's purse lay in the dining room with the contents scattered. The family dog had been locked away in the basement of the home. Interestingly, no items were stolen from the house, leading the investigators to believe that the burglary was staged. The medical examiner ruled that Kathy died from a single axe blow to the head and the brain while Kathy had been asleep. The handle of the axe had been wiped clean. The time of death was believed to be between 6:55 a.m. and 8:55 a.m., which ruled out Kathy's husband James as a suspect. This case became known in the media as the Brighton Axe murder. In the initial investigation, one suspect considered by investigators was the convicted killer and sex offender Ed Larrabee, who lived near the couple's home at the time. In fact, in 2014, when he was in prison for an unrelated murder, Larrabee confessed to killing Kathy Krausneck. However, the details he shared weren't consistent with the evidence. He said the murder occurred during the summer of 1981, when, in reality, it was the winter of 1982. Apparently, Larrabee was a reputed serial confessor who falsely confessed to several crimes that he did not commit in order to gain notoriety. Some of the supposed victims he had claimed to have murdered were, in fact, still alive. Investigators were short of physical or circumstantial evidence to link anyone to the crime. Despite tireless efforts from the investigators, the Brighton axe murder remained unsolved for many years. Just a day after Kathy's passing, James went back to Mount Clemens with Sarah without even informing Sarah's family. Sarah would not have any contact with her maternal family in the following years. 4 years after the gruesome murder in 1986, James remarried. However, it only lasted 9 months. Although James claimed that he had remarried in order for Sarah to have a mother, his second wife believed that James had ended the marriage after he felt a close bond developing between his new wife and Sarah. As the 1990s progressed, James remarried twice after he had moved to Washington. He joined a subsidiary of Weyerhaeuser. He climbed the corporate ladder and worked in California and Georgia before he was promoted to vice president of sales at the company's headquarters in Washington. Even though James had an early divorce from his third wife, he and his fourth wife, Sharon, seemed to have a good marriage and led a luxurious life. They bought a 4-bedroom French country house in Gig Harbor near Tacoma. Meanwhile, Sarah moved to Texas and started her own family. However, she was always in close contact with her father and stepmother. As years passed, not much progress was made in the case until District Attorney Sandra Dorley and her team started taking a closer look in 2015. They began rummaging for evidence that might have been missed previously. Amongst the evidence was a thin, blue fiber made of glass that came from a shattered window of the house. Dorley tried to match it to a previously untested blue knee sock found in the house. After extensive testing yielded no DNA from a source outside of the home, the idea of an outside killer was pretty much blown out of the water. Sandra and her team zeroed in on one possible suspect, Kathy's husband James. Yet they could not just charge him based on circumstantial evidence. And there was one more problem. The time of Kathy's death put him outside of his house at the time of the murder and therefore ruled him out as a suspect. However, Dorley and her team weren't ready to let him off the hook that easily. They then contacted renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden, who has previously been integral in many high-profile cases after studying all of the pertinent documents from the case, including police reports, autopsy reports, photographs, and other evidence. Baden concluded that Kathy died before James left for work that morning. He explained that, contrary to what the original medical examiner had reported, he believed the time of death to have been earlier, due to partially digested food in her stomach and the stage of rigor mortis that her body was in. The original examiner had observed rigor mortis to have set in the evening of the crime. Baden stated that it takes a minimum of 12 hours for a body to reach the level of rigor mortis observed. Hence, he opined that the murder must have occurred between 9 p.m. the previous evening and 3 or 4 a.m. on the morning of the crime. In 2019, based on Dr. Baden's analysis along with their other evidence, James Krausneck was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. His trial began in August 2022. The defense tried to point out that all the evidence was circumstantial and that Kathy could have been a victim of Larrabee, who had already passed away. The prosecutors argued that there was no evidence of an intruder, the robbery was staged, and James was the only person who could have killed his wife, considering their young daughter was unharmed despite being present at the scene. The jury sided with the prosecution. James Krausneck, who is now 70 years old, was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of his wife, Kathy, in 1982. 41-year-old Sarah, however, stood by her father and did not believe her father had anything to do with her mother's murder. On the other hand, after 40 years of mourning, Kathy's family feels relieved to see that justice has been served. Kathy Krausneck's sister Annette Schlosser, when asked about how the last 40 years have gone, told Spectrum News that their mother had died without knowing who her daughter's killer was. Annette was quoted saying, "We were living in hell," and she believed that because who could do that to her daughter? Kathy's 95-year-old father, however, was present in the court to witness James being held accountable for his daughter's horrific murder. The only thing the Schlosser family now wants is to reunite with Kathy's daughter, as they have had no contact with her in years. They stated, "We hope they can heal together from this tragic incident." James Krausnak will be sentenced on November 7th in front of New York State Supreme Court Justice Charles Sciarrano. Do you trust Dr. Baden's conclusion, or is it all just circumstantial evidence? Orange County is Florida's top-tier tourist destination. It attracts more than 75 million tourists each year from around the globe. The University of Central Florida, the second largest university in the nation, is also located here. Only 2 miles away from Orlando and near Highway I-5, Orange County is home to our childhood dream of Disneyland. But today's story unfolded at this place as the victim was a resident of this suburban area in 1992. 53-year-old John Stagner was living in the Orange County area with his wife and mother-in-law. In 1992, he was working as a maintenance worker in a maintenance facility in the Orange County area. The residence where he was living was on property owned by the county's maintenance department. Stagner was a very hard-working man and did various odd-end jobs, even at odd hours. His co-workers and local residents described him as a friendly and kind man. He was very dedicated to his work and always took care of the community through his work. He was an avid sportsman. According to his wife, he possessed a great passion for fishing and hunting. A lot of friends remembered meeting Stagner for the first time on a fishing trip. On his day off, he often went fishing and hunting with some co-workers. It was a small, tight-knit community just off of Forsyth Road, where everybody knew the residents and everyone had only good words to say about Stagner. So clearly he was the kind of person who would go beyond his ability to help someone in need. It was a stormy night in the Orange County area on August 10th, 1992. Dolly, Stagner's wife, watched him get called out to clear a roadblock. A tree had fallen in a nearby area due to the rainstorm, and he had to take care of it before the next morning. Although it was still raining outside, Dolly did not think much of it. She was familiar with the scenario as her husband often had odd hours of work due to his maintenance job. Stagner came back pretty soon after wrapping up the job. He did not immediately go to sleep. He was watching TV when she went to bed. They both had separate bedrooms because while Dolly loved the AC, her husband was fond of natural cool air coming through an open window. She did not check the locks before going to sleep as Stagner was the one who usually did it. He was pretty good at keeping the house secure and always locked the doors. When Dolly woke up the next morning, it was still dark. It was almost 5:30 a.m. when she went to wake her husband up in the other bedroom. He was still in his bed. His skin was ice cold when she touched it and he was not moving at all. Upon closer inspection, she realized that her husband had trauma to his head and face. Dolly immediately called 911 to seek help for her husband. Deputies from the Orange County Sheriff's Office reached their minutes after the crime was reported. Unfortunately, Stagner was pronounced dead at the scene. The community was shocked and distraught upon hearing the news. After all, how often does a middle-aged man get killed silently in his own bed and no one has a clue? Especially when John Stagner had no known enemies. Back then, Orange County was considered a pretty safe area, so no wonder this senseless murder shook the small community to the core. When the forensic investigators and crime scene photographers arrived at the scene, there was not much evidence to begin with. The crime scene was gruesome. Somebody getting bludgeoned to death in their sleep? What could be more brutal than this? Forensic teams, however, had done a phenomenal job of collecting all the evidence. Nobody knew those shreds of evidence would remain in the preservation and would only come into play after 30 years of the murder. The initial investigation began with interviews. The police interrogated his wife, mother-in-law, co-workers, and almost everybody he had a connection to. August 10th, 1992 was a busy Monday morning at the maintenance facility, and deputies pretty much asked around everybody if someone had any problems with Stagner after they showed up for work. As it turned out, there was one person who had issues with the late John Stagner, Ronald Cates. Ronald Cates was one of Stagner's closest friends. At the time, he was living in Orange County with his 2 daughters and his wife, Kathy. Ronald, or Ronnie as people usually called him, was a little younger than Stagner. Around 1992, he was in his middle 30s and had no work. He used to work with Stagner once, but he got out of work a long time ago. His wife, Kathy, was the sole bread earner in the family, and she worked 2 jobs to financially support the family while Ronald sat idly at home doing nothing. He had a major drug addiction and often borrowed money or pawned items to pay for the drugs. Despite this, the 2 families were very close to each other. Stagner and his wife even helped the Cates family to find a place and pay for food when they were homeless at one point. Stagner took the Cates family under his wing, and Ronald even considered him a father figure. He would occasionally let Ronald borrow money and even lend him his maintenance tools. Problems started when Ronald would neither return the money nor the tools he had borrowed. He would pawn the tools and use that money to buy drugs. At first, Stagner brushed it off, but when this became a frequent thing, he had no choice but to confront Ronald. When detectives found out these details, they went to his house for interrogation, but they instead met with his 13-year-old daughter, telling them her father was not home. She was visibly shaken, and detectives could tell there was something wrong, but they had no search warrant, so they ended up leaving the place but kept it under watch. They just left for a couple of minutes to make a phone call when one of the trucks from the driveway was driven away. So they again approached the house, and this time the daughter said something else. Ronald apparently prompted his daughter to lie about his whereabouts and quickly left the house once the police left. Pretty quickly, Ronald Cate became a suspect in the murder of John Stagner. More details came in later when some co-workers testified to seeing Ronald at the local store on that Monday morning. According to them, he was acting very strangely. The detective also recorded the testimony of his family, and they also said that around that time his behavior was very strange. Even during the initial investigation, Ronald was a person of interest in this case. He had the motive and he had the opportunity, but nobody knew whether he committed the crime or not. His DNA and fingerprints were found later on from the house, but as he was a frequent visitor there, was problematic to convict him based on that. The behavior, on the other hand, definitely raised suspicion. So in the beginning, the investigation zeroed in on him. They kept him under watch for days, but could not gather enough evidence to arrest him. As the years passed, the hope of this case ever being solved slowly faded away. Ronald Cates remained the person of interest, but got the opportunity to live his life normally. Though the detectives tried their best, no probable cause could be found to make the conviction possible. However, something happened in 1995 that added a notable element to the story. Allegedly, in 1995, Ronald Cates had a suicidal episode. When he was hospitalized for a mental breakdown during evaluation, he confessed to the killing of John Stagner. As thought-provoking as it sounds, he also blabbed a lot about killing some historical figures. It was legally not possible to convict someone based on the confession they made during a mental breakdown. Once again, the detectives could not go forward with this lead for understandable reasons. So for 30 long years, the solution remained elusive to the detectives. In 2020, one of Ronald Cates' daughters contacted the investigators to provide more information regarding the murder. In March 2022, Detective Kevin Wilson took over the case and talked to Kathy and her daughter numerous times. These extensive interviews with the Cates family shed light on many inconsistencies between Ronald's and his family's timeline of events. Investigators found enough evidence to finally make an arrest, and the case had finally come to an end in an unexpected manner. So finally, on August 10, 2022, exactly 30 years after the murder, Orange County Sheriff John Mina and the OXO Cold Case team provide an update about the case. At a press conference, Detective John W. Mina said that Ronald Cates was in jail on charges of first-degree murder. He was arrested in North Carolina and admitted to the hospital for a mental evaluation. There, he told a nurse that he killed Stagner in 1992. The Salisbury Police Department responded to the hospital after the nurse reported this incident and obtained a Ronald confession through a 10 to 12-minute body cam video. However, he has yet to reveal any motive for the murder. Detective Kevin Wilson said that Stagner was very close to the family. He added that the family really cared about this case, even if they were the suspect's family, because Mr. Stagner was very good to the Cates family. Ronald Cates was recently extradited to Florida, and he made his first court appearance on August 17, 2022. So what do you guys think about this case? Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.